on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
How are you on this snowy day?
Man, I'm cold.
It's plumb cold out there.
It's plumb cold. Yes.
We've got some frigid temperatures here in western North Carolina and an unexpected late springish snow.
Well, and if you've lived in this area for any amount of time, this is not abnormal.
It's not.
You always get that little taste of spring, and it kind of,
70-degree days and you're wearing shorts.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere you get a blizzard.
A snowstorm, blizzard, frigid Arctic blast. And, of course, we're doing better than large swaths of the country because there's a significant snowstorm. A nor'easter that ripped across the middle part of the country earlier a couple of days ago, and now is up there just dumping it all over them.
Oh.
Yeah. And then it started snowing.
I don't need all that snow.
No, you know what? I'm ready for spring. I'm ready for summer. I'm ready for the birds and the small animals being born and all that good stuff. And, I'm over it for now. And you know what, winter? See you next year. You know what I'm saying?
Peace out.
All right. So here we are freezing our nipples off in the Mountain Murder Studios. But the work must go on. Right, Heather?
Speak for yourself. My third one is perfectly snuggled up and warm under my boobie right now.
That's the mark of the devil.
That's what I've heard. In true crime news, Dylan, the family of slain 22-year-old Gabby Petito believes that Brian Laundrie's parents knew about her murder, according to a civil lawsuit that was filed this past Thursday.
Now they're saying they knew details of what happened to their daughter, basically.
Well, the parents stopped hearing from their daughter back in August while she was traveling the country with Brian, and they had feared something had gone horribly wrong because she had kept in touch with them. Then Brian abandoned the cross-country road trip. He left behind Gabby and returned in her van to his parents' home in Florida. I know you've heard the story, just giving you a little recap. This has been huge true crime news over the last 8 months?
Yes.
Nobody in the Laundrie family notified Gabby's parents that she was missing or that Brian had left Gabby behind.
So even when he came back to his parents with her vehicle, not with her, they still didn't instantly, hey, we have to contact Gabby's parents.
Exactly.
Because that seems like the natural, as soon as...
Yeah, this was a young woman who would be their daughter-in-law soon.
Yeah, who had lived with them in their house, correct?
Significant amounts of time in their household.
Yeah, so that was, I thought, in the beginning, I found that very strange. And the fact that he left and came all the way back home, 1,000 miles or whatever it was, and really didn't have an explanation for where. I knew that he had done something to her. There was no doubt in my mind.
We all knew.
Right. And it always makes me remember what, I'm sorry, just what a douchey guy. He has to take her van to drive himself back home after he murdered her.
In September, Gabby's body was found in Wyoming. A medical examiner determined that she had died by homicidal strangulation. And Brian vanished around the same time. There was a nationwide manhunt for Brian Laundrie, tips pouring in, investigators searching all over the country for this young man. But in the end, he was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the Florida wilderness in October. Now, after a very lengthy criminal investigation into Gabby's murder, the FBI found Brian was responsible for her death. He had actually written the confession in a notebook before he took his life. So with all of this information, Gabby's parents, Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, have decided to take legal action against Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, alleging in the lawsuit that they helped their son conceal Gabby's murder.
And I don't think that's a stretch. So now this is likely a civil suit of some sort, correct?
Yes. Now, the lawsuit raises some questions and issues they have with the fact that the Laundrie family immediately took a camping trip after Brian returned home from the road trip in September, while Gabby's family was essentially suffering. It also claims that around the time the Petitos reported Gabby missing, Roberta Laundrie blocked Nicole Schmidt's phone number and blocked her on Facebook.
Yeah, see, these are very strange behaviors from someone who is not guilty of something.
The media had reported that early in the investigation into Gabby's disappearance, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie had not been cooperative with law enforcement, claims that are echoed by Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt in this lawsuit.
Now, so, okay, from your perspective, what do you think about them, the Gabby's family, bringing this suit against them?
I think they're perfectly within their rights.
I think they are. And I think, honestly...
His parents acted in a very despicable way throughout the entirety of this investigation. They essentially helped their son flee, and they knew, I believe, firmly, I think they knew, he was going into this nature reserve with plans to carry out a dastardly deed of, unaliving himself or whatever.
Oh, my God. I was going to use that. Thanks. I was going to say unaliving. I agree completely. I think that he's basically telling them, hey, I've done something. I can't, I'm not, and I don't think it was about like, I'm despairing so badly that I hurt Gabby. I think it was, I can't stand up and take the consequences of my actions.
Exactly.
I'm not going to make it in jail.
Coward's way out
I'm never,
in this situation.
So, and I think that's why they instantly turned around and took that family camping trip that seemed very strangely timed to everyone.
Yes.
And to have some last moments, last memories with their son because they knew he was going to go kill himself. Unalive himself.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, we're just using unalive. It's a funny word me and Heather found the other day. It's because you can't say suicide. So,
well, you just did.
Well, I'm just saying. But a trigger warning.
The word police will be here.
Trigger warning.
Oh, my gosh. There's a vocabulary SWAT team at the door right now. I can hear them, Dylan. Hurry, hide under the bed. Oh, you can't fit there.
So, yeah, I think they could have been charged criminally on
with
multiple
like obstruction
counts.
of justice.
Yes.
That's what I think, because they knew where he was.
Obstruction and possibly tampering.
The fact that they went into the reserve and immediately found his belongings.
Mm-hmm. They knew where he was.
They knew exactly where he was.
And this is a preserve that had been flooded for days, underwater, literally. And I think you could get them for obstruction. They were not cooperating with investigators and aiding and abetting after the fact, or possibly tampering with evidence.
They should be held accountable for their actions.
Because what state was that van in when it got to their house? Did they help clean it out? So, I'm surprised that the authorities have not done this, brought these criminal charges. So here we are in the civil side, which I don't think a lot of people realize there's some very interesting differences between the civil side and the criminal side of our courts.
Yeah, we've discussed this previously on Mountain Murderers. Seems like families have a lot more luck prosecuting in a civil case, even though it's not exactly maybe the right language, but winning a civil case based on facts and information over getting a prosecution in a criminal court.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, they're trying to get $100,000 for their emotional damage.
I don't think it's about the money.
Not a vast amount of money. No. It's not like they're suing these people for $10 million. So I think, naysayers can't point and say, well, this is a financial motive. $100,000. Hey, I'm not going to turn it down. That's a lot of money to me and probably to most people, but not when you're thinking of the value of your life's your daughter's life.
Well, I think it's more along the lines of a principle for the family,
Absolutely.
Gabby's family. And let's be honest, they've been offered way more than $100,000 at this point for rights to movies, books, stories, interviews. So I don't think it's about the money. So, and I'm not saying they've ticked any of those offers, but I'm sure the offers have come in.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We'll be following that. Dylan, are you excited about today's case?
I am really excited.
I'm excited about this one.
And I think it's very interesting, and I think our listeners will really enjoy it.
We're going to give you some history lessons. You're going to learn a lot today, I promise.
You're going to learn the answers to questions you didn't know you even had.
Exactly.
Boom.
That's what I like, Dylan.
Okay.
March 6th of 1989 was a day like any other in Nashville, Tennessee, known as Music City. You've never been to Nashville, right?
I've heard of that place.
Have you been there?
No.
I didn't think so.
You're going to take me.
Yeah, we have plans to possibly venture off to Nashville here in the next couple of months. It's fun. I grew up, my aunt lived in Dixon, which is a suburb of Nashville. I got to spend my 21st birthday in Nashville, Tennessee.
Wow.
Great memory from what I can remember of it. It was a fun time. Go down to Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, the Bluebird Cafe, Ernest Tubbs Record Store.
Well, I think it's just one of those areas that's just steeped in history, many different kinds of history. And it's a world renowned. You know, I think you could probably find someone in Japan that, you know, you say Nashville and they know what Nashville means.
Country music.
Country music, you know, old-timey music and all that. So it's very, very famous and very interesting place.
Kevin Hughes, a 23-year-old, worked as chart director at Cashbox Magazine. On this day, he went to see a movie with his friend Sharon Pennington, who happened to be a record promoter at Step One Records. Sometimes I think my brain's got a little...
It flips things.
Flips, yeah. After the movie, Pennington dropped Hughes off at his office building during the early evening hours. While they were out seeing a movie, Pennington relayed a message from a man named Chuck Dixon. Now, we got to talk a little bit about Chuck Dixon, Dylan. He is a legend on Music Row. Being a legend, that doesn't always come with positive connotations, right?
Well, I was going to say maybe it's infamy.
He's infamous, yeah. But a bit of a legend. I mean, he definitely was a man who got some stuff done on Music Row. Dixon was known as the godfather of country music. A shady character with an unsavory reputation, especially relating to how he got things done in the music business. Described as an egomaniac with a loud mouth, Dixon wanted Kevin Hughes to drop stations he was using to compile charts. Now, you may be asking, what does that even mean, Heather? I don't know anything about the music business. Well, I'm about to school you.
Let us know.
We're going to need a pause here for a quick country music history lesson. You like country music, Dylan?
Yeah, I like country music.
I like old country music.
I like old country music more.
I'm a big country music fan when it comes to the old stuff.
I listen to all different...
Traditional country, I should say that.
I listen to all different kinds, just like you. But I do think that, especially the older classic country that during that era, was country music was a very important genre of music.
Tennessee was, has been known for its musical roots dating all the way back to the 1700s with world-class fiddlers. In 1824, a hymnal called Western Harmony was published out of Nashville. This song was hugely popular and set the scene for what would become known as Music City. In 1885, an evangelical minister named Sam Jones was holding a tent revival in Nashville when a riverboat captain named Thomas Ryman heard his fiery sermon. I'm telling you today, it's something else. Ryman teamed up with Jones to create a religious gathering place in the city. Folks helped raise the money to build the Union Gospel Tabernacle in 1892. In May of 1892, the May Music Festival kicked off with Theodore Thomas Orchestra hosting its first concert at what is now known as the Ryman Theater.
Oh.
So, debut concert at this new venue will become the Ryman.
Now, I'm right quick, I must say, I never knew Nashville was known for music all those years ago. I mean, that's very interesting. Hundreds of years ago.
I told you would learn something today.
Wow.
A few weeks later, 4,000 attendees packed the Tabernacle to hear Reverend Jones speak. Now, he didn't show up, thus earning him the nickname No-Show Jones. Have you heard that? I've heard people called No-Show Jones before, but I didn't really know what it was rooted in. But there you go.
So they basically built this place around him showing up and have given his fiery sermon is a big part of it. And he just doesn't show up when the first time it's packed full of people.
Yeah, 4,000 attendees.
Yeah, that's a rather large entertainment gathering back in the day, especially.
The space was used for Vanderbilt University's commencements and theater productions, such as Old District School, which is a old mountain play.
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I think school was maybe translated into school later on. But, I guess kind of a famous old Southern kind of mountain old-timey play. In 1901, the space needed to expand its stage for an elaborate opera production of Carmen. So it's kind of at that point they began adding on, hey, we got to build a stage. We're bringing in operas. It's not just some little old, little tiny concert. It's becoming a big thing.
Yeah, so they're like, we have this venue, and we're going to make good use of it, and we're going to bring different acts or types of things in, and which I think is a really great idea.
By 1925, WSM, a 50,000 clearwatt radio station, was created in Nashville, Tennessee, which broadcast a full-time country music playlist. A show called WSM Barn Dance debuted with a performance by Uncle Jimmy Thompson, and that began broadcasting in 1925. The Barn Dance was referred to eventually as the Grand Ole Opry.
Wow.
Around 1927. And this is a name that would stick. Everybody knows about the Grand Ole Opry, right? Unless you're living under a rock.
Well, no, I mean, that's one of those things that it doesn't matter if you're into country music or not. You've likely heard of the Grand Ole Opry.
Pop culture iconography, right? Well, by the 1930s, the show, known as the Opry, expanded to a 4-hour block on the radio and featured professional performers. Roy Acuff and Floyd Rose founded a music publishing company on 16th Avenue, which was the first successful attempt to legitimize country music in the city, at least by folks not associated with the Ryman. Music studios began to kind of follow. More were created along with the one owned by the brothers Harold and Owen Bradley. They were the first to really open a studio on what is now known as Music Row. Soon the area surrounding 16th Avenue was nicknamed Music Row, as all the buildings and small cottages along this stretch of the street were somehow associated with the music industry. So you've got publishing companies, recording studios, record labels. It's like the place to be.
Yeah, so everyone in the area has their fingers in the music industry.
Like what Broadway, what you would think of like 44th and Broadway or whatever being associated with like the New York theater scene. Or Hollywood Boulevard.
Associated with drug addicts.
In Los Angeles.
Prostitutes.
Associated with the Hollywood stars.
Right.
Right? I mean, so it's that kind of thing. By 1943, the Opry moved to what is now the Ryman Theater. So then they built a nice big space specifically for the Opry.
So this has really taken off.
Really
it's
taken
turning
off.
into a thing.
Yeah, and it was really with the creation of radio broadcasting that the country music industry began booming.
Yeah, and could you imagine being alive in this time? Because now we have things are advancing at an incredible rate, and it's like, oh, cool, now I got a hologram. I mean, but you've had all this other entertainment. Like when radio took off, I mean, that was a game changer.
Well, up until this point, folks had very limited availability for entertainment. I mean, you might be living in a holler up in Kentucky like Loretta Lynn, right?
Right.
You have no real access to the outside world, completely isolated, unless maybe, your daddy or your mama play an instrument and you have some family come over and maybe do a little picking and grinning on the porch. But this was something that you had a radio, you turned it on, and it was a family event. Everybody sat around the radio. And because it was one of the only forms of entertainment that people had.
Yeah, and it wasn't just music. It gave rise to radio programs,
the Shadow Knows.
That are just purely for entertainment, scripted
the Lone
entertainment.
Ranger. I mean, you had all those scripted radio dramas.
Yeah. And so now in the modern version is podcast. Now you're getting scripted podcasts and the big business, which is fun. We talk about how funny it is, the big business entertainment people getting into podcasts because they're just like, oh, I'm just going to sit around and talk with all my star friends, which is really not, podcasts is kind of...
It's not in the spirit of what podcasting, I guess, began as, but yeah.
But yeah.
Everything gets commercialized. We know that.
Radio was huge.
Radio
was a big
deal.
deal.
Huge. I mean, it is how people got entertainment and,
News.
learned about the world around them. By 1950, RCA Records signed Elvis Presley. At the end of the decade, about 500 recording sessions were being held each year in Nashville. A decade later, there was about 5,000 recording sessions a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So as you can see, I mean, it's just boom, boom, boom. It was in 1950 that Nashville was dubbed the official music capital of the world. Billboard, which a lot of folks are familiar with, began publishing in 1894, founded by James Hennigan and William Donaldson as a trade publication for bill posters. In the early part of the 20th century, Billboard covered the entertainment industry, providing actual billboards. That's where they got their name.
And that's funny.
And flyers for circuses, vaudeville, fairs, burlesque shows, and created a mail service for entertainers as a way to be able to communicate with their families while they were on tour on the road.
So, wow, that's pretty amazing. It's kind of the origins of Billboard, which is so big nowadays.
I told you you're going to learn a lot in this episode. As radio and phonographs became more popular, and eventually jukeboxes, Billboard began focusing more on the music industry. In the 1920s, Billboard created a radio broadcasting station. During the Great Depression, the jukebox industry took off. People could pay a few pennies to hear their favorite songs. Billboard published their first hit parade in 1936 and introduced a record buying guide by 1939. In 1940, it introduced its chart line, which tracked best-selling records. And I think that's what most of us know Billboard. That's how we know Billboard today.
Right.
Is, it's a chart.
Yeah.
The top 40 countdown.
And it's a big deal to be on it.
Exactly. So by the 1940s, the publication became more music-centric, serving as an industry specialty publication. To compile charts, Billboard looked at record sales and radio play. By 1942, Billboard wasn't the only publication in the game. Cashbox Magazine was created. If you want to compare Billboard to Cashbox, it's kind of like buying from a big box store like Walmart versus a small business like Etsy. In the difference between Billboard and Cashbox.
Okay.
So Billboard's like the Walmart, like the big box store, and Cashbox was like the little independent engine that could, right? It was like if you're buying something from Etsy. Cashbox was the underdog, but it was more attuned with what people were actually listening to on the streets. Cashbox was a gem for small independent record labels and unknown artists. And while Billboard was crunching the financials, Cashbox worked with indie stations, which had much more freedom to play music than the larger stations. And this is still true today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so larger stations typically have to follow a pretty strict format with only a few songs in the rotation. That's why when you're listening to the radio for longer than 20 minutes, you're probably going to hear like the same 8 songs.
I can't, and I know it was in some corporate boardroom. Some dumbass had this great idea and it took off. I just can't understand who thinks that is the best thing to do.
Dude, when I worked in radio, I had a huge problem with this. We went from being like an independent station
Where
where
you could literally play
I had
what you
freedom to play pretty much whatever I wanted, to, picking up a satellite feed where they chose the music format and I was just a DJ. All I did was like an on-air personality. I didn't have any hand in picking songs. And it's the same stuff, but I guess it's designed for like a quick commute. They estimate people are going to be in their car maybe 10 to 20 minutes listening to the radio on the way to work, on the way home. So they're trying to play these super popular songs so that you're hearing those while you're in the car for this short amount of time.
Oh, so no matter for whatever short amount of time you hear their station, you're hearing the most popular, and it's supposed to make them feel like, wow, they're really on top of it. But all it does is ruin music. Because
this is true. This is a big complaint with why people don't really listen to radio now that you can do streaming apps and pick your own playlists and pick your own music. Because I think these suits, I don't know what it is, but it's like they seem to think that if you like hip hop, that's all you listen to.
Right.
Right? And I think people have broader tastes and they can kind of appreciate maybe a looser format.
There used to be stations, and those were always my favorite when I would stumble across a station that played a little bit of everything.
Yeah, a variety.
And you never knew what was coming next. And you didn't love every song, but sometimes it was like, they played a great song you loved, and then boom, another one from a completely different genre. And I think that is the best way to go, because I used to work outside, and we listened to the radio all the time, and it is maddening with this corporate shitty loop thing they do.
Corporations killed the radio star.
Fucking iHeart, bro.
Clear Channel, iHeart, yeah.
Damn.
Smaller stations have the ability to branch out, play more artists, and a variety of genres at times. So one of these smaller stations, you might hear some rock music and pop music. You might hear a crossover hit that's got a little country tinge to it, a little twang. But with these big stations, we all know you're never going to hear that shit.
No, and you're stifling creativity in an industry that is, because even if you have a good DJ who has great taste in music, the people are going to react to that in a good way. They're going to tune into that person's show. But this just stifles, it homogenizes everything and stifles creativity. And I don't understand why people think that that's a good thing to do in something like a music setting.
Cashbox's chart research teams relied on these smaller stations to give air reports, what callers wanted to hear, and what was being played on these stations. Both were influential in the country music industry. Kevin Wayne Hughes, back to our story, was born October 29th of 1965 in Carmi, Illinois. His mother, Barbara, described Kevin as discovering a love for country music upon entering grade school. He bought Billboard magazines and dreamed of one day moving to Nashville to make it big in the business side of the country music industry, which is unusual, Dylan. Mostly when you hear about people wanting to move to Nashville to make it, they want to be a star. But he's like, no, I want to be on the back end.
Well, and there's a lot of money to be made there, and a lot of,
what's an important job?
Very important, because without the back end, the other, no one would make it.
Exactly.
Someone has to handle the T's and crossing the T's and dotting the I's.
Not everyone can be shiny. And that's the problem with today's society. Everybody wants to be the shiny one.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be on the back end.
There's nothing wrong with filing the paperwork to help the shiny one achieve something.
He even began making his own charts and rankings when he was a kid, which I think is kind of cute. In 1986, he left college to become director of Cashbox Magazine's Top 100 Country and Western chart. Kevin was described as kind, religious, trustworthy, and loyal by those who knew him. Kevin loved his job and living in Nashville. He would often put in unpaid overtime hours, Like, instead of leaving at 5 p.m. like everybody else, Kevin would be in his office until like 10 p.m. each night, poring over the information, compiling his charts, making sure every detail was there.
Now, I can imagine Cashbox has a much better idea of what's truly popular and people are listening to just because of the way they gathered their information and their statistics through these on-air reports, or literally what the DJs say people are calling in and requesting at the moment.
Dylan, in theory, you would be right. But let's discuss. We'll discuss this further. Hughes, remember, he'd been to a movie with his friend Sharon. She dropped him off back at the office, and now he's made other plans. Dylan, he has dinner plans with a new friend, a recording artist and record promoter named Sammy Sadler. Sadler didn't know it at the time, but his friend Kevin Hughes had been experiencing some issues at Cashbox. Hughes was being pressured to adjust the charts he oversaw, often being offered cash, gifts, like expensive sporting tickets.
Oh, by the people.
And even physical threats.
Oh, so by the managers of acts, bands rather. Is that who would threaten him, wanting like fake statistics to support them?
Well, mostly it's Chuck Dixon, and we're going to get into that right now, Dylan.
Oh my
Another history lesson for you. Are you ready?
Oh, Chucky D.
Fill your big brain up with some knowledge. In the early days of the music industry, a practice known as payola, which was paying DJs and program directors to play your records, was not illegal, but it was fairly common.
I've heard of this before. Pay to play.
Yeah. Yep. The line was continuously blurred for a number of years. In 1959, a payola scandal rocked the world of rock and roll, taking down a beloved radio DJ named Alan Freed and almost destroying Dick Clark's career.
Wow.
Now, obviously, payola is problematic. When money changes hands for certain artists to be featured, those artists get more attention. And we all know exposure is key to making it in the music business. In an ideal world, the public's response to music should drive the bulk of the attention.
It should be natural, and it should be off of your talent and what you've created, period.
And what people want to hear.
You're right.
With payola, a record label can easily decide which artists will succeed and which will fail. So if a record label has a lot of money to pour into payola, it can be a way to phase out any competition and see that only their artists get radio play. Though it's illegal now, payola still happens. One of the latest cases was back in 2005 and involved Sony Music, when it was noted that they paid DJs to play Sony artists such as Jessica Simpson.
Jessica Simpson.
So you can kind of look into that if you want to know a little bit more.
Well, and I think that proves the point right there. I mean, nothing against Jessica Simpson. I used to watch Jessica and Nick, right? Is that the one?
Yeah. The chicken of the sea.
Yeah. And, but, I mean, come on. And there may be some Jessica Simpson fans out there who loved her music. It was just some, generic pop, in my opinion. But it wasn't incredible, right?
She's been really successful as a businesswoman, running her own fashion label. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, she's smart,
she was pretty
obviously.
Attractive. I mean, she had all the qualities to make a pop princess, and she wasn't untalented.
No.
But that's never really been, I'll listen to like Britney or Jessica or Christina Aguilera back in the day when it was like on the radio or something. But I was not like a rabid pop fan, so.
Well, and that shows you the effectiveness of this very scheme of payola for a huge company like Sony to still participate in the modern day.
Exactly. And I will note, my daughter wanted some of the Jessica Simpson edible body lotion for Christmas.
Yeah.
So I took to eBay to try to locate this shit. I was like, they still make it? And she's like, no, you'd have to find, some of the original.
Vintage.
Right. Oh my God, that shit's selling for like $180.
Well, that's just the law of supply and demand.
I guess, but I'm like, really, who wants this?
It's out of
Besides,
circulation.
like, just having it as a novelty.
Well, I mean, yeah, there you go.
Because I think she just wanted it for the novelty. You know, these kids, they're like obsessed with Y2K fashion now. I don't get it. Anyway, in 1987, Chuck Dixon hired Kevin Hughes to work at Cashbox Magazine. Dixon was the division manager at the time, and eventually Dixon would no longer work for Cashbox, but still had his hand in the pie. Hughes was working to legitimize the Cashbox charts for independent artists and improving the magazine's image. While working at the magazine, Hughes had uncovered Dixon's own payola scam.
Damn it, man.
Chuck Dixon would take money from indie artists, somewhere around $1,200 to $2,000 from them initially, to get their name on Cashbox charts. So some of these, green behind the ears newbie artists had this idea that if they could come up with, $10,000 or $20,000, they would be able to make it.
So it's not even, they're taking the what if out of the equation. If I can pay this much money and they can pay people to play my records, and you're just almost automatically guaranteed to make it.
Yeah, Chuck Dixon's going to make me a star. Then those artists who had moved to Nashville with starry eyes would pay Dixon until their money ran out. And that's when he would just drop them like a hot tater.
Yeah, because, so what, they have no recourse because what they've been engaging in is unethical at the very least and possibly illegal. So, yeah, what can you do? You can't, there's nobody to go complain to.
I guess you just bend over and take it.
Yeah.
With no grease.
That's right, unlubricated.
Now, all the while, the green musicians had no idea what was really happening, thinking every day they were closer to their big break, forking over all the money they had for this scam. A starter or smaller radio station having that larger playlist made it easier for a promoter to obtain play for certain songs. So Dixon was angry with Hughes because he had dropped some of those smaller stations, but was also refusing to continue this pay-for-play scam. So not only has Hughes moved to drop those stations, but Hughes is also refusing to take money and be bribed.
So he's basically saying, look, I compile this chart. It's important, and I want it to be pure, as it can be. And I want it to be natural and organic.
So with Hughes in this position, Dixon could no longer manipulate the songs being played.
So this is ruining a huge money-making scam for Dixon.
Right, and like Big Worm said, you play with my money, you play with my emotions, Dylan.
That's true.
So that's probably how Chuck Hughes felt, or Chuck Dixon. That's probably how he felt about Kevin Hughes. Now, on the afternoon of March 9th, Sammy Sadler, who was a recording artist and promoter at Evergreen Records, met Kevin Hughes for dinner. The pair were just beginning a friendship. Like they had just met. They're both kind of, these young guys, new to Nashville. They meet. They really hit it off. Come from these small towns, big fans of country music. So it's like they're really trying to build a friendship here. So they go on their little mandate. And Sadler had actually been in Nashville for a couple of years, but he didn't know about Kevin Hughes' problems relating to Chuck Dixon, as I mentioned before. Now, after dinner, the men went to Sammy Sadler's office at Evergreen Records in order for Kevin Hughes to make a phone call to his parents. So while Kevin is on the phone at Evergreen Records, Sammy thinks he hears someone at the door, but it's locked. He goes out, toward the front and saw a man walking away from the building. Afterwards, around 8:30 p.m., the pair departs, and they're out on 16th Avenue where Kevin Hughes has parked his car. As Sammy Sadler is entering the passenger side of the vehicle, a man wearing gloves and a mask appeared at his door with a gun, just seemingly out of nowhere.
Oh, my God.
His first reaction was to throw up his arms to protect his head, but he's shot. The assailant was wearing all black clothing, a ski mask. In the panic and confusion, Sadler somehow made his way to a nearby apartment building. But Kevin Hughes, seeing the gunman, tried to flee running down the street. But the gunman fired several times, hitting him. Sammy was shot in the arm, which severed a major artery. Kevin, however, was shot in the back of his head with 2 bullets entering into his head, and he was shot also in the back. Kevin Hughes was dead by the time law enforcement arrived at the scene.
Damn.
Bystanders like Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings stood behind yellow police tape while trying to figure out what happened.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so there were like some big name country music artists that happened to be in the area at the time and maybe didn't witness the shooting, but they're there witnessing the aftermath, right? I mean, that in itself's like, whoa, right? Now, immediately, law enforcement theorized the intended crime was murder, not a lesser crime like robbery.
No, it seems like it was just a outright assassination, right? I mean, the intent was to make sure he died.
From the beginning, police had a difficult time with the investigation. There were no suspects, no motive, and no solid witnesses. 2 students from Belmont University witnessed the murder. Robert Lyons III and Allison Kidd Chimento were driving down 16th Avenue when the driver, Robert, said he saw Kevin Hughes like roll away from this car and start running. A man came from the other side of this car and begins pursuing Hughes, who's now running. And so this guy's just driving down the street watching this happen, right? He watches the gunman fire 2 to 3 times. He sees Kevin Hughes fall to the ground. The assailant then fires 3 more shots. Robert Lyons noted that the gunman was wearing all black and held a blue steel revolver in his hand. He told law enforcement that the shooter was somewhere between like 5'10" and 5'6" with a stocky build. The eye holes in the mask were cut kind of wide enough that he could see the perpetrator was a Caucasian, and that he seemed to run with a strange side-to-side gait. That it was a very strange way of running.
So it's like you never see anyone run like this.
Right.
Very, very weird.
A man named Philip Barnett was living in an apartment on 16th Avenue when he heard the shots fired. So he looks out the window, and that's when he saw these 2 men running in a zigzag pattern until they were out of sight. Donnie Lowry, another apartment resident, witnessed a similar thing along with his visitor, Kathy Hunter. So you've got multiple people, gunshots, and then they see a masked man chasing another man down the street.
That's quite the scene.
Yeah. Officers gathered evidence at the scene, including a spent projectile near the victim's head and a ball cap near Hughes's right foot. A hair is actually found in the ball cap, Dylan.
Nice.
It is submitted to the FBI for analysis. A hair and fiber expert would later say the black hair had characteristics of cat hair.
Okay. You know, there's still a ongoing discussion about hair comparison. And sometimes I think fiber analysis is even, better typically than hair analysis because you can go down all the way down to chemical composition, shapes of the fibers and all that on the microscopic level. Some of it is very telling. But a lot of people still think that hair analysis in comparison is junk science. And it's very speculative and not that great of a, let's say if it's another part of a bunch of evidence and you have one of them happen to be a hair, cool. It could support,
it just makes it tough if that's your only forensic evidence.
Yes, because it's not like a fingerprint. You can't take my hair and Heather's hair and say, oh, look, that definitely belongs. You could take 2 people with brown hair and there's going to be, I don't know. It's not 100%.
During autopsy, 2 more projectiles were removed from Kevin Hughes' body and also sent for testing. Through their investigation, law enforcement learned of this pay-for-play scheme. Some whispers pointed them in the direction of Chuck Dixon and another record promoter named Richard D'Antonio.
Wow, so he's been attacked and killed, and very quickly the cops are finding out about people who may have had some problem with him, right?
People in the industry speculated it was a professional hit because it had been so clean with very little evidence left behind. A few suggested that Kevin was involved in the scheme as he was in a position to accept money from a promoter or an artist to move their record up the charts. However, law enforcement found no evidence to support this theory. I mean, it was actually completely, the opposite scenario, that he was refusing to take this money.
Yeah. Not only is he not taking money, he's being vocal about the fact that he's not going to be bribed and he's going to do things above board.
And law enforcement also didn't believe Kevin's job was important enough to warrant a murder for hire. So it baffled police that if Kevin was the target, then why was Sammy Sadler shot as well? After the shooting, Sadler had to undergo multiple surgeries to repair the damage to his right arm. At the time, Sadler was just getting ready to release his debut album on Evergreen Records. He had released an album previously, but with a different record company. The suspicion that Sadler may have been involved in this murder of Kevin Hughes basically cut his music career short.
But he was shot too.
Yes.
Is that just to make it look good?
But people were whispering. I mean, you know how people are, Dylan.
That's true.
He probably had something to do with it. I mean, just bullshit, right?
It's like Suge Knight being in the car with Tupac. Tupac's killed, Suge Knight's injured, but not killed, or was even shot. I don't even know if Suge took a bullet.
Might have been shot.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that people opened up with automatic rifles basically, and you're not killed when you're in a vehicle with someone. It's almost like they were pointing just at the one person. It's weird, right?
The murder on Music Row, though salacious, went unsolved. In February of 1993, one of the detectives on the case learned that a man named Steve Daniel, an aspiring songwriter, had sold Richard D'Antonio a gun. In 1993, Steve Daniel and D'Antonio had written several songs together. D'Antonio promised Steve Daniel they would, get something going, for him selling these songs. Like lots of people who want to be music stars, Daniel's career was stalled, and in order to make ends meet, he began selling drugs. He was not, by most standards, what one might consider a drug dealer, and even law enforcement was he's no pro, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He's a guy who's just trying to make some money and then gets involved in something that's way over his head. When police show up at his home with a warrant, and this was actually the Georgia police because he's living in Georgia at this time. It's the GBI.
Oh, I was going to say.
I should clarify. GBI agents show up at his home with a warrant. They find 5 55-gallon drums filled with 273 pounds of marijuana.
That's a lot of reefers.
So during this drug investigation, the GBI, these agents soon learned that Daniel had information about a murder, specifically the murder of Kevin Hughes. It was on the same day that Kevin Hughes was murdered that Daniels had sold D'Antonio a .38 caliber revolver. Daniels sold it to him for $150, and he didn't have any bullets at the time, so he had to go out and buy some, bullets for this gun, and ended up getting the cheapest thing he could find. So when D'Antonio arrives at Daniel's house, D'Antonio wants to go out and shoot this gun in the backyard. So they go out and they pop off a few rounds of this gun. Now, this information sounded convincing enough for GBI agents to contact the Nashville Police Department.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty interesting how they bust this case open. D'Antonio had been on a short list of suspects back in 1989 and was even interviewed by detectives. Again, folks were whispering, D'Antonio, Chuck Dixon, this is who you should be looking at. But there was no evidence to tie him to this crime scene at the time, back in 89. With a new lead in the murder, detectives began looking into D'Antonio. Nashville police convinced Steve Daniel to place a recorded phone call to D'Antonio. Without getting the kind of confession they had hoped for, detectives were not able to make an arrest yet. They had only circumstantial evidence, But police could put a .38 revolver in D'Antonio's hand, though they could not yet prove he had been the triggerman. Again, this case went cold.
Well, yeah, it doesn't sound like they have any other leads. And what they do have is very circumstantial.
In 2002, the Nashville Cold Case Squad decided to take another look at Kevin Hughes' murder. Detectives had a new idea, and they wanted to run it by the GBI agent who had helped bring Daniel's story to them back in 1993. So detectives thought, even though it was a long shot, if they could find the projectiles from those few test shots in Daniel's backyard, they might be able to connect those projectiles with the ones found at the crime scene. And then they would be able to move on D'Antonio.
I would call that a very long shot.
Right? Now, everyone agreed it's worth a try. Crime scene technicians were sent out to the home in Georgia where Steve Daniels was living back in 1989. They used a metal detector which uncovered bullets up and down an embankment. 13 slugs were found in all. The bullets were sent to the lab to be compared with the slugs pulled from Kevin Hughes' body. Now get this, Dylan. 1 out of 13 matched.
Really?
Just 1 out of the 13. And the marks on the single bullet was determined to have been fired from the same gun that killed Kevin Hughes.
Wow. So their long shot's possibly paying off, right?
After 13 years, the detectives were finally able to place the murder weapon in D'Antonio's hands, yet detectives still needed to find a motive for this murder.
Yeah, it seems like that was somebody was really thinking outside of the box on that, and just had that one little snippet of the person recalling him, hey, let's go shoot this gun I got. Let's go try it out. Now, when you first said that, I was worried if they shoot outside all the time, multiple weapons or whatever, it'd be really hard to find that one shell out of all these shells. But it sounds like that's not somewhere they commonly shoot, and which increase the odds of finding these shells all the years later.
Now, don't hold me to this exactly, Dylan, but to go along with what you're saying, just in the research and listening to an interview with Steve Daniel, it definitely seems like he was not a gun guy.
Right.
And so this request for get me a gun, get me bullets, I mean, he was just kind of like, I can do it, but he was not someone who was constantly out shooting a gun.
Right.
Right? So that definitely helped these detectives. And, you know, we often talk about those certain detectives that refuse to give up, and they will work on a cold case and revisit it 100 different times, keep coming back to it, because they are damned and determined we are going to solve this one day.
Well, and I think that just getting resolution for any victims and making people be held accountable for what they did is their driving force on that. And some detectives put a lot of energy and sometimes their own money and resources into a case like this. They can never let it go. They want to see it through.
Well, by this time, D'Antonio had moved from Nashville to Las Vegas, where he had worked in a casino. But when police found him, D'Antonio was unemployed and living a quiet life. D'Antonio was arrested for these crimes. Richard D'Antonio was then extradited back to Nashville. The district attorney, Tom Thurman, wanted to prove in court how the shady promoters were working. So if a scam was uncovered, it could be the motive they were looking for in Kevin Hughes' murder. Since the pay-for-play scam was mostly targeted at fresh, independent artists, the DA's office decided to forge ahead with an undercover operation. So this is very interesting to me. They had a female agent pose as a singer, and she was admittedly not a talented singer.
By design.
I've heard this lady, and let me just say, I mean, she maybe could be like the queen of the karaoke.
Right. So she can sing a little bit.
At a good old roadhouse somewhere.
Yeah.
After you've had about 6. But yeah, she's not Jessica Simpson, Dylan.
So here we have this mediocre singer.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And then what happens next?
Well, after paying some money, the woman found herself moving up the Cashbox charts.
Wow.
During D'Antonio's trial, the prosecution was able to shed light in a public courtroom about the scam. Rival promoters were called to the stand to testify for the prosecution. And by the time D'Antonio was being tried, Chuck Dixon,
Chucky D.
not Tuck, Chuck Dixon had already passed away back in 2001. So Chuck Dixon will never
be held accountable,
be punished for what he was involved in here.
Right.
Now, an expert in firearms testified that the 2 projectiles removed from Kevin Hughes' body and the 3rd projectile found at the crime scene were all fired from the same gun, a .38 caliber 357 wad cutter lead projectile.
That's a common target. What's a cheap bullet?
Yeah.
Right.
And have we talked about a wad cutter? Aren't they pretty brutal if they hit the skin? Like if you're shot with one?
I'm pretty sure they're rather soft,
okay.
right? Which kind of make them flatten out and spread out. I do know that when I was a child and we would often target shoot, people would use what they call these wad cutters. And I think the biggest reason for that was the cost.
Well, and the thing with these particular 357 wad cutters, Dylan, is that they were mostly reloads.
Okay.
So they weren't even like
factory bullets.
Yeah, exactly.
I could be wrong on that too. There might be a gun person who's like, "Our dumbass don't know what," but that's in my experience.
No, I think that's what it is. I mean, my dad's a gun person, and like he probably still does. But at his old house, he had a reloading machine in his bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you turn the ladies on.
Yeah, you want to come back here and see my reloader? Okay, so then this expert testified that the one found in Flintstone, Georgia, at Steve Daniels' property matched the projectiles from the Kevin Hughes crime scene. Now, Steve Daniels testified that he had known D'Antonio since 1985 or 1986, and that on this particular day, which was March 9th, 1989, D'Antonio arrived at Daniels' house unannounced around midday, asking to buy a pistol. And Daniels had to scramble a bit to, get a gun, get him some bullets. But Daniels ended up selling him a .38 pistol and provided those reloaded .38 bullets along with the gun. Now, the 357 bullets. Now, the two then kind of went out back. They shot the gun. D'Antonio departed Daniels' house somewhere around 6:15 or 7 p.m. after having spent some hours there. Let's see. D'Antonio had then spoken to Daniels later, stating that if my wife Caroline calls you to ask where I've been, you tell him I was in Georgia with you till 11 p.m.
No, I'm not lying for you.
Well, according to Daniels, the drive from his house to Nashville was around 2 hours and 15 minutes. Daniels also corroborated eyewitness accounts that D'Antonio had a strange gait that was almost like an animal, not a person. He's like, I have seen D'Antonio run, and it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Like, it's a memorable run.
Oh, wow.
That he has.
Wow, and that was a very key detail, the description of the killer.
Another man named Gene Kennedy, who had been a promoter and record producer for 28 years, testified, under immunity, I might mention, that he'd promoted to Cashbox Magazine until 1988. At that time, Kennedy was approached by Chuck Dixon, who offered him a deal for $1,500 and the purchase of an ad to promote at the magazine. Now, Kennedy refused to pay Dixon, and for 3 years, the records that Kennedy promoted, they did not appear on Cashbox charts. Chuck Dixon had essentially blackballed him and all of the artists he represented.
Damn it.
Yeah. So Kennedy believed that the charts in 1989 were still controlled by Chuck Dixon and Richard D'Antonio. The Cashbox charts lacked legitimacy. Kennedy even had a meeting with Kevin Hughes a week before his murder. Now, during the lunch meeting, Hughes acted very nervous, especially at the mention of Chuck Dixon's scam. Others testified that it was common knowledge in the music industry that you had to pay Chuck Dixon and buy an ad in Cashbox Magazine before you would appear on the charts. The minimum amount for 6 to 7 weeks on the charts was about $2,500. Now we mentioned it could be anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000, but if you wanted this 6 to 7 weeks, $2,500. And this is a lot of money in 1989.
Yeah, it is a lot of money, and especially that just being on the charts is not automatically, where are you at on the charts. Very few people are like, man, that song that's 103 on the charts is really, really like who cares? And once you get in top 10s and things like that, people notice. So you're paying all this money, and you really don't have any kind of a guarantee that you're going to get any kind of a significant return on investment.
Right, unless maybe you're paying more and more money.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's like, if you keep giving me more,
yeah.
And as soon as they either run out of money or kind of get tired of doing it, these people who are perpetuating this scam, they don't care. All they want is your money. They don't care where you're at on the charts. They don't care if you make it or don't make it. They care nothing about you. So it's just all about the money.
Well, the bulk of this money lined Chuck Dixon's pockets. I mean, he might have doled out a little bit to the folks he was paying off at Cashbox.
Yeah, and it might get spread around a little bit to, some DJs or however they perpetuated their scam. But I'm sure the bulk of it, here's the thing, is once who knows how much even gets forwarded past Chuck? How much he just sticks in his pocket.
An artist would pay the money, then have a hard time manufacturing their record. Like, that was another problem they were running into, is they would pay all this money. Dixon would ensure you're going to chart, and they would. But then when it came to actually getting a record manufactured, what is that, pressed and all, they couldn't get it done.
So it's like, what's the point?
Exactly.
Right?
Robert Metzger, another witness, and I'm sorry, earlier I had mentioned that Gene was the one who had gotten immunity, and I mixed my guys up. I'm sorry, it was actually Robert Metzger, and I'm just going off of what I remembered from the story. I didn't actually put that here in my notes. Now, Robert Metzger, this other witness that did, testify under immunity, had seen Chuck Dixon and Kevin Hughes engaging in a heated argument at a radio seminar just a couple of weeks before Hughes was killed. Now, Dixon was trying to give Kevin Hughes money, and he was refusing to accept it. So after this incident, Metzger had a meeting with Dixon and d'Anonio. He had an artist about to release 2 more records and was preparing to pay $15,000 to Dixon in order to get those records charted and keep them on the charts for an extended period of time.
I just had a great idea.
What's that?
I wonder if anyone's running this very same payola scheme in podcasting.
I just gave him an idea.
The modern day...
Well, you know what I have to say? Not to disparage others, but I have heard some podcasts that are like in that top 10 sometimes, and I think, who are you paying? Because this show is awful.
Well, here's the thing. Any chart can be manipulated, and honestly, I was kidding, but the modern day version of that is buying clicks.
Yeah, it is.
Which is a bot farm or a literal warehouse full of people in China or something clicking your website to give you false traffic numbers. And that can go not just podcasting, but websites and social media.
Influencers who are buying followers.
Early on, when we were trying to get some traction, we actually saw this. Because at first I thought it was something that could help you for real. And it turns out that's what it was. You're just buying clicks. And it's not real. But then the algorithms and all that don't know that. So that's a payola scheme, right?
It is.
In the modern day.
So during this meeting, Metzger expressed to Dixon that he was aware Hughes had dropped some of those smaller pocket radio stations and was planning to drop more. Metzger told Dixon he was not going to hand over this $15,000 unless they had a handle on Kevin Hughes.
Oh.
Metzger also told Dixon that rumor all over Music Row was that Hughes planned to go to the media and expose this chart-fixing scheme at Cashbox.
Wow, this seems to be some pretty good motivation.
It would make everyone look bad who was involved. Dixon told Metzger, quote, "I'll handle Kevin Hughes, and if I can't handle him, he'll be gone."
Okay.
When Metzger received those assurances, he went ahead and paid Dixon this $15,000 and bought a paid advertisement in Cashbox. In return, that particular artist was the highest charted indie record and was named Cashbox Male Vocalist of the Year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn, they're getting the full treatment.
Just a few weeks before Hughes' death, Chuck Dixon hired Steve Hess as an assistant chart director. After Hughes was killed, Hess took over the job and was trained by Chuck Dixon. Now, Hess didn't know if Dixon worked at Cashbox, but was told by its owner, George Albert, that Chuck Dixon was in charge. Because at this point, Chuck does not work at Cashbox.
Right.
At all. But the owner's like, yep, he's in charge, even though he's not on the payroll there.
No, but he's still directing revenue into the company's coffers, keeping them kind of relevant, making them seem like that's the place that you have to be seen.
Sketchy.
Yeah, very.
Dixon had control over the reporting of nearly half the 125 stations that were reporting to Cashbox. So he's got control over these stations. He's got the program directors, the DJs in his pocket.
So he's can manipulate.
Yeah, he can
the
make
charts.
it happen. Definitely.
That was why he could get you on the charts when he told you he could. Because if you got 50% in your pocket or around that, and then the other, some other stations might play you, you'll get that too, then that's going to guarantee you to get on a chart and to get some exposure.
Another employee of Cashbox named Gary Bradshaw also verified the scam. He said during this time working at the magazine, Chuck Dixon would threaten a person when he became angry, telling them, "You'll meet the same fate as Kevin. Like if you cross me."
Okay.
Do you want to end up dead like Kevin?
Well, I mean, I would just be like, do you want me to call the cops and tell them you just told me that because you're one of the few people that had a motivation to kill Kevin?
Well, again, he's like the Godfather. I mean, people are like intimidated by him, and he clearly has access to the muscle. So I think people were just very intimidated by this guy's reach. In 2001, a search warrant had been executed at Chuck Dixon's home. Now, remember, he died in 2001. But they were able to seize 2 payment books containing names and dollar amounts.
You got to love that.
No records were recovered from the period of October 1988 to 1989, though other books, like the lead up to these dates, were present, and then the books after this date was present.
Wow.
So this is the Kevin Hughes time period. That whole year, that book was totally gone.
So he has this ongoing record of who he's paid, when, what amount, and for years.
Yes.
And to the degree that you can see when a book's missing.
Yes.
Wow, that's very interesting.
In 1988, the total amount of payments made was $136,757.09.
Now, do you think a lot of times this would be like somebody literally drives to a radio station, small radio station, gives the DJ a $20 bill and says, make sure this plays tonight once or twice. Or the program director, hey, make sure that you bring these songs in, not these. You think it's like a lot of it was small payments and spreading it all the way around to all these stations?
Yeah, I would think that's probably the case. Makes more sense, right? So D'Antonio made 5 payments to Chuck Dixon totaling $3,499. During his time at Cashbox, D'Antonio earned about $13,000 a year. But after leaving, he went into business with Chuck Dixon doing artist development. And his ex-wife testified that it was right after he left and started this business with Chuck Dixon, didn't even have any clientele yet. That's when he decided to buy 2 houses, 3 cars, a grand piano, and a motorcycle. And
Wow.
so she was like, I knew he was making $13,000 a year. How is he buying all this? And he's got all this cash. He's flashing mad cash. And I knew that there's no way that his salary correlated with the amount of spending he was doing.
Right, which he has to be doing something else, which is likely illegal to be getting all this money.
Right, and that's exactly what she thought. Well, D'Antonio was convicted of first-degree murder as well as assault with intent to commit second-degree murder for the shooting of Sammy Sadler. He was given a life sentence, which he served at the Lois DeBerry Special Needs Facility. He died September of 2014.
Wow.
In 1999, a bluegrass group called the Larry Cordell and Lonesome Standard recorded a song called Murder on Music Row. It was performed at the 1999 CMA Awards, the Country Music Awards, as you know, by Alan Jackson and George Strait.
A modern-day murder ballad.
Not quite.
Really?
The song protests against the rise of country pop music taking over the charts, leaving traditional country out to die.
Oh.
It became widely popular, and the country music legends won a Vocal Event of the Year award for their performance. To this day, the song is considered a staple of country music, specifically, maybe like traditional country music style. When you think about Alan Jackson, George Strait, that's more traditional country sounds. And so while the song tells the story of traditional country music losing its footing in the industry, the real meaning behind Murder on Music Row translates to something else for a lot of people.
I've never heard that song. I'll have to check that out. But so yeah, that's very interesting.
And that has been the story of a real life murder on Music Row.
Man, I got so much stuff to think about now. I'm thinking about the history, the historical significance of Nashville and the music industry, and how it's developed. And unfortunately, I think country music as a genre has fallen victim to every other thing in our life nowadays.
It's homogenized.
It's being gutted. It's soulless. It's hollow. It has no heart.
It's all flash.
It's all flash and numbers in some boardroom where people think this is how and it's all about the bottom line. Back in the day, everyone wanted to make money always, and that's always been true. But sometimes it was like, I'm going to try this because I think it's good and I think it's different. And I think it's what people really want. If it's super successful, great. If not, and I can make just enough to get by, I'm okay with that too, just to get this art out to the world, this entertainment out. But now everything's all about shareholders. And I think that is one of the core problems with our country in many parts of the world, not just America. Being beholden to the shareholders. That's not, most companies were privately owned. Well, I think before the IPOs were even offered, every company was privately owned, and they didn't have to answer to anyone. The bottom line can't always be making shareholders money. And that's what's ruining everything.
Well, no, when you get into any form of art, whether it's music or acting, painting.
Yeah.
And the problem with the entertainment industry is we've come to this place. It's superficial, right?
Right.
Everything has to be perfect, polished, attractive. I mean, look at Conway Twitty. God love him, but that loaf of hair. I mean, he was not
an attractive guy
by conventional standards. Attractive. Now, when he's singing "I Love to Lay You Down."
What's his voice?
Your panties might drop and go flying up on stage, right?
Oh, my God. Those panties get around.
They do, right? Because he don't even care if you're in your old faded flannel gown.
But it's his voice.
He wants to lay you down. But he was a fucking talent, right? I mean, back then, it didn't matter what you looked like. As long as you had the chops and you had the talent, you could make it.
Well, look at all the, it's true.
mean, George Jones, people call him the possum.
Well, even
because he looks like a fucking possum.
The actors, the huge actors from our day, Meryl Streep, Pacino, De Niro, none of them are like what you would think
of conventional
attractiveness, but they were just that. It was going off of their talent. And I'm not saying any of those people are unattractive.
I find them all attractive in,
right.
certain ways, definitely.
Right, but we talk about this all the time. Back in the day, it seems like you don't have this cookie cutter bullshit of what other people who don't even understand the art or entertainment think will make money, and that's the problem.
Right.
That's the heart of the problem in almost all aspects of our lives now, including our health care.
I mean, rarely do you ever see some short, overweight, chubby, balding, below average looking guy with a fucking amazing voice with a #1 hit.
Well, I was going to say that you do see that now, like on people doing their own TikToks and things like that, but they're not going, and they have more talent, more singing talent than the super handsome, pretty whatever.
And this has been a problem for years. I mean, look at Milli Vanilli lip syncing because these guys had the image. And
Right.
maybe they didn't have the talent, but the image. I mean, it's just some bullshit. And you're right, Dylan. It's definitely destroyed the music industry as a whole because they want to market this person. It doesn't really have anything to do with talent. And then you get into doing all the weird, like highly produced auto tuning and
Right.
shit like that. And you don't even have to be able to carry a tune in a bucket to make it big.
No, and now with the algorithms and the way you can manipulate the things on the internet, it's only getting worse.
Yeah, there are some of these people out there that, you're like, how did this person ever make it? Besides the fact that they're cute or whatever. Anyway, I thought this was a fascinating story. It's one that I've hoped to get out to our listeners, and I'm glad we finally did.
And if people want other incredible stories like this one, which I really enjoyed, thank you, Heather, where can they get that at?
Well, Patreon is an excellent place. We actually just uploaded the first part of an Australian serial killer case that was requested by a patron. You can get a lot of bonus content there. And you can always send us an email if you have a case suggestion or just want to give us some positive feedback. We get some really lovely messages from folks that are listening all over the world, and it really brightens our day to hear from you. mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. It's a good way to hit us up.
Yeah, and that's also a good way to send us a story if you want to be on an episode of the Shitbird Registry.
Well, there's that.
So you send us a story about a person who's just a total piece of shit, and we will cut out names, keep it anonymous, and read it.
We already gotten a couple
I know we
suggestions.
do. All right, so thank you. And also, check us out on TikTok. Having so much fun over there. Heather's doing some great things. It's fun. It's creative.
I'm riling them.
And she's riling up people. Got them in the comments talking about So, yeah, just go on over to TikTok and check out Mountain Murders.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back on Wednesday with a midweek episode. Don't forget to check out our second podcast, Batshit Crazy. Brand new episode there for the week as well. And yeah, have a great week, guys.